Welcome back to this episode of the Stronger by Science Fireside Chat podcast. I am your host, Greg Knuckles, joined as usual with my temporary guest co-host, Eric Trexler. Eric, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I am doing well. So, we haven't done that many Fireside Chats. We haven't done one in a while. Just as kind of a recap of what we're doing here for new listeners, people who haven't listened to a Fireside Chat podcast, this is not a fitness podcast. We are two people who work in the fitness industry talking about random stuff. So you send us your questions. We share our hot takes about things wildly outside our realms of expertise. Try to keep it fun, try to keep it light. And yeah, that's what we're doing. So let's launch right into it with a question that is kind of in our wheelhouse. So it's not directly fitness related, but we read a lot of exercise science literature, interpret it. That's one of the main things we do for our jobs. And there was a question about what bothers us the most when we come across it in a study. So we pull up a paper, something jumps off the page at us and just very much grinds our gears. So do you want to lead this one off, Trex? What things get under your skin?
Yeah, I'd be happy to lead off here. So I'm pretty statistically oriented. That's just like the thing in grad school I really latched onto. It was really looking at methods and statistics. And so my answer is obviously biased in that direction, but two things that really get under my skin. One is when there are a lot of irrelevant or unwarranted post hoc tests. And so basically, very, broad oversimplification here. You do your main test, you find some interesting effect, and in many cases in the models used in our field, you then have to do some follow-up comparisons or tests to try to really get to the root of that interesting effect. And more times than I would like to believe possible, I'll look at a paper and the initial analysis makes sense. They use the right model more or less. And there's a very interesting effect. And I'm like, ooh, let's dive in and follow up on this and figure out what's causing this interesting interaction. And the follow-up testing just does not get to the root of it whatsoever. And so it kind of makes you question if they really interpreted what that interesting interaction was telling them, like what the actual theoretical meaning of it was, other than just like, looks like a low p-value, so now I'm just going to kind of recklessly dive into this data. So that's the one thing that gets under my skin.
Well, so we've talked about this before. One of the potential reasons for that, right, is that a lot of people in our field use SPSS to run their stats, and a lot of those more appropriate post hoc tests aren't possible in SPSS unless you're going to write the code yourself, which most exercise scientists don't do.
Right, yeah. So there's a lot of point and click options, but like SPSS, the SS part stands for social sciences. Like this was not made for exercise scientists or people who are doing, randomized controlled trials with longitudinal measurements. You could use it for that, but it's not like the bread and butter. And yeah, the easily available point and click options don't really lead you to the post hocs that would be, or the follow-up tests that would be most interesting and most relevant to the type of designs we typically see. And so for that reason, people have to go off script a little bit. I do get the sense that a lot of people in the field aren't very comfortable writing their own code. So like in SPSS, to be fair, you can totally just write your own code and make those things happen. But I think it's a barrier or a hurdle that a lot of people don't like to circumvent in the field. Like that is a big leap when you start going from I point and click my options to, okay, I'm going to get under the hood and start writing code.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't trying to call anyone out. Like,
yeah.
I don't know any programming languages for stat software. I use JASP for that reason. Like it's another point and click option.
Yeah. So that is, you're totally correct. That I think that is a big contributor, is that a lot of the really user-friendly software applications don't make it easy to find those really appropriate options. And for that reason, you start to see a lot of comparisons that either aren't relevant to the initial thing that they're attempting to follow up on, or they're just really crudely kind of slapped together. And obviously that is very prone to having some limitations in terms of how well you can slap that together. So yeah, that is definitely a contributing factor. So the post talks, a lot of times you'll see the initial analysis, you go, oh, this is going to be really informative. And then you keep reading on and you're like, man, there's a lot missing here.
Yeah.
Another thing that drives me nuts, this is more related to meta-analysis. And so in many cases, you will see someone do something in a meta-analysis that everyone knows you're supposed to do. And so, like, for instance, they'll be like, hey, I am going to present you with a funnel plot. And you go, great. And you look at it, and it is, like, horrifically asymmetrical. Like, there are big problems here that need some very serious interpretation. And they just don't. So they're like... They're like, I understand that you expect me to give you a funnel plot.
Yeah.
And then you do, and the funnel plot is telling me a lot of stuff, and they never bring it up again. Never address the fact that there's horrific asymmetry. And the reason it matters, you know, if there's anybody listening that reads mass, is the last 2 times I've seen a horrifically asymmetrical funnel plot that was just totally ignored in the interpretation, I go back into the data and I'm like, oh, your effect size is wrong. That's why it was horrifically skewed and asymmetrical, which is like, dude, like, use this screening tool and actually follow up and figure out what happened here. The other time it was like there were really important effects in the data that were not modeled into the analysis. And so, like, that asymmetry was not rampant publication bias. It was a totally unmodeled effect in the data. Mm-hmm. And the thing that's frustrating is that you can kind of tell that they're giving you what they have been told they're supposed to do, but they're not looking at it and thinking, what does this actually mean? You know, they're just checking off the box to say, yes, I did it. Are you happy now? And the thing that's crazy is, like, the reason you're supposed to do it is because it gives critical information that needs to be considered when you start interpreting the actual conclusions. Mm-hmm. And so to see all the information there and it just get completely ignored is just like, come on, this is really bad.
Yeah.
So those are my 2. What do you got?
Yeah. So for like the 5 listeners who are still here, we really picked a banger to lead this one off. So there, I have several. One is poor presentation of data, or really like insufficient presentation of data. So on like the poor presentation of data front, one thing that's very common in our field is to just use like bar graphs to demonstrate like changes or kind of like pre-post measures. Well, I guess histograms. But yeah, like that's pretty common, like bar plots and histograms, when, at least for me personally, I want to see the individual participant responses. So there are like various types of line charts you can use, or just like scatter plots. And that's kind of like a personal preference type thing. But when you're basically collapsing, say, 20 subjects worth of data to just like one bar and a standard deviation like bar coming up off of it, I think you miss a lot of the nuance. And I totally get why you would try to collapse a lot of those individual data points into like individual lines and bars if you're dealing with a large clinical trial that has like 400 subjects, because, you know, you're not going to be able to pick out individual data points there. But for most of the work in our field that has 25 subjects per group, if you're lucky, like, you can show the individual data, you can relay more information in your charts, and just help people get a better feel for your data set. So I would say that that's kind of like on the poor presentation of data. But then on the insufficient presentation of data, there's a lot of stuff that would be easy to include in studies that would help provide more information to the reader that most people just simply don't do. And so a good example of this would be 2 things. So one, would be if you're getting p-values and you just report like that it is under the significance threshold. So, they'll report like this was significant, p less than 0.05, which tells you something, but not that much. So, for example, if a p-value is like 0.048 or 0.0003, like you interpret those very, very differently, because if something is just below the significance threshold, it very easily could have resulted by chance. Whereas if there's a much, much lower p-value, that is probably a more robust and reliable finding. So just like reporting that it's under that threshold doesn't really tell you much. But then the thing that I see all the time that just drives me crazy is when a study reports like mean changes, but not any measure of variation around it. So, almost universally, if you're, say, reporting things pre and post, there will be like a standard deviation or a confidence interval around that number. So, people pre-training squat 100 plus or minus 10 kilos. Like that's pretty typically how it would be presented. But then if it's like a training intervention and you see that they increased their squat by 15 kilos on average, it is very rare to see a confidence interval or a standard deviation on that change of 15. And I think that that's unfortunate for a couple reasons. One is, well, really just one main reason. The biggest thing is like you would interpret it different ways based on how big that standard deviation is. So if you see that an intervention improves squat strength by like 15 plus or minus 5 kilos, that tells you that for most people, their squat's going up somewhere between 5 and 25 kilos. Like it's pretty good for most people. And it's reasonably homogeneous. Like you hear 5 to 25 kilos, that sounds like a big range. That's fairly homogeneous for the literature. If it was, 15 plus or minus 10 kilos, now it's completely different. Like now you're probably dealing with some subjects who actually got weaker and some who had, ludicrously large increases. And then it can kind of get the wheels turning. Like, okay, like maybe this is an intervention that's useful on average, but maybe there are some characteristics that would tend to make it more beneficial for some people and really not appropriate for others. So I can't give many details on this, but I'm currently working on a data project, looking at some literature. There's like around 80 studies that I was looking at total. And I think overall 12 of them or 13 of them, something like that, reported like a standard deviation or a confidence interval around mean changes. And that's one of those things that like that is going to be in the output of any statistical software you use. And it takes like fucking 9 additional characters in your text to report that. So yeah, like that's something that would be easy to add that most people just don't. So that grinds my gears a little bit. This is one that's actually somewhat timely for Trex and I. When a study has hypotheses that don't actually relate to the tests they run or the study that they design. So, and this is like a philosophy of science qualm. Like the scientific method, what you do is you have an idea, you form a hypothesis to test that idea, you design a study to test that hypothesis, and you use appropriate statistics to make sure that you're analyzing the data appropriately to test the hypothesis to check your idea. Like that's the basic process. And so like the whole thing starts with an appropriate hypothesis. And dude, there are a lot of papers in our field that just have hypotheses that are completely inane and not at all related to the way a study was actually designed. So I don't even remember the exact example. What was it in the study that you recently looked at?
Well, it was just so keeping it vague so as to not call anyone out individually. The general idea was that it was an intervention comparing 2 diets. And the hypotheses that were given completely, they had no regard for the fact that there was a control or like a comparison a comparator diet in the mix. It was just like, we think this diet is going to cause this effect in terms of, fat loss, muscle gain. And the problem with that is like, well, you don't need a comparator group if that's really your hypothesis. And more importantly, your hypothesis tests aren't testing that hypothesis.
Right. Yeah.
So there's just no congruence at the basic kind of theoretical level.
Yeah. Yeah. So like the whole point of the study was we want to see if different responses occur in these two groups. But the hypothesis was like, we think something is going to happen in one group.
Right.
And so, yeah, I'm not saying that they didn't put any thought into that study before they ran it, but based on the wording of the hypothesis, it certainly appears that that they designed the study before they actually like put thought into what their hypothesis was going to be.
Right. Or just like didn't verbalize their hypothesis with their statistical concepts in mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which like that's science 101. Like if someone has taken like a freshman, here's how you do science class, like they should know that.
Yeah.
I feel like this is mostly like stat stuff that pisses us off, but
it is.
Yeah, whatever. So the next one for me is like,
well, like what else is it going to be? It's not being like, people don't give protein enough love. Yeah, they do. Like it's all going to be stat stuff here.
Yeah, whatever. Like for our 5 listeners who are still here, we appreciate you. The next one is probably like just laughably stupid power calculations. So let me pull the curtain back. Here's how power calculations actually work in exercise science. You want to run a study, you have a hypothesis, you design the study, and you look and see like based on how many lab workers we have and based on what our budget is for this study, we can do this with 20 people. Like we can put 20 people through this protocol. That's what's going to be like doable and feasible for us. And then you pull up G power and you're like, what would my effect size have to be for me to have appropriate power with 20 subjects? And they just fucking back calculate it. And that's not how power calculations are supposed to work. And if you know what effect sizes are and what power calculations are, like most of the time power calculations in the whole field are just absolutely hilarious. So one of the ones that immediately comes to mind was it was a study without a training intervention where they were just giving people leucine at meals, I'm pretty sure. So like one group was getting like 3 grams of leucine with every meal, and one group was getting a placebo supplement with every meal. And they wanted to see if that would affect like fat mass and lean mass accretion with literally just leucine supplementation. And so, if you know anything about that literature, like, leucine supplementation, maybe it does something, maybe it doesn't really do anything. If it has an effect, it's probably a pretty small effect. So if you wanted to be, if you wanted to say that it has a non-trivial effect and that's about all you can say, you would say like, the effect size we're looking for is a Cohen's d of 0.2 or like just over 0.2. That's probably still kind of generous based on the leucine literature, but whatever. You could possibly justify a slightly above trivial effect size. Or if you wanted to be very lenient, you could say maybe this will have a medium size effect, which is typically defined as like a Cohen's d of 0.5. They said that it was going to have they didn't verbalize that it was going to have a large effect. They were like, to detect an effect size of Cohen's d of 0.8, we would need 12 subjects per group. Yeah. And it's like, dude, if you know fucking anything about leucine, you don't expect a large effect size. And so like just to put some actual numbers on that, a Cohen's d of 0.8 means that you expect the subjects to change on average by 0.8 standard deviations, which would basically mean going from average to
savage.
Yeah. Average to somewhere in the neighborhood of like the 70th percentile for some characteristic. So, if they started with like, I don't know, like 60 plus or minus 5 kilos of lean mass, give or take, like that's a kind of normal lean mass number for people in the general population. That would mean that you were expecting them to put on 4 kilos of lean mass just from leucine supplementation in like 6 weeks, which is fucking ludicrous. Like, there's no way that they actually thought that was going to happen, but it's because that's how power calculations work in our field. You say, like, what number of subjects can we actually do? Like you were talking about with the meta-analyses, like just having a funnel plot to check a box. Like, journals expect to see power calculations, but they don't actually expect to see like good power calculations.
Yeah.
Because like to actually have adequate power for that leucine study, they probably would have needed like 50 plus subjects per group. Actually, probably even more to detect effect size of like 0.2. But whatever, like they knew they wanted to do this study with leucine. They knew they could recruit about 20 subjects, and they were like, let's just plug these numbers in G-Power and make it work. And I think that's how power calculations are typically done. But it always grinds my gears. Next one, another stats thing. So if you're doing like a longitudinal training study or diet study, and you're looking to see if different changes occur in 2 or more different groups pre to post, typically you're going to run an ANOVA. And if you want to see if different changes occurred between groups, you would look for a group by time interaction effect. And then you do post hoc tests to figure out like in which groups were these changes different. But something that used to be more common is getting less common, but I still see it in, couple studies every couple of months, is they will have a significant effect for time. And in post hoc testing, they will see that in one group, there was a statistically significant change pre to post, but there wasn't a statistically significant change pre to post in the other group. And they therefore treat that as a significant difference between groups. And sometimes, sometimes they don't even look for an interaction effect, which is concerning. But then a lot of times, like maybe it was just underpowered, and like maybe there is kind of something there, but the interaction effect wasn't quite significant, and they're misinterpreting their statistical tests, but maybe it can kind of slide. But then sometimes it is just completely egregious where, maybe one group puts like 7 plus or minus 4 kilos on their bench, and the other group puts like 5 plus or minus 8 kilos on their bench. And like the actual difference is 2 kilos, but one had like a pre to post change with a p-value of like 0.04, and the other one was 0.07. But it's basically the same change in both groups. But one of them cleared that hurdle for significance and the other one didn't. And they're like, well, one was significant, the other wasn't. Big difference between groups. Let's run with this. And a little piece of my soul dies every time I see that.
Yeah, well, it goes back to that idea of treating like p-values. You kind of touched on this earlier, but treating a continuous number as if it's categorical. It's either less than this or it's not. It reminds me of that coffee study we talked about a million years ago, where they were like, well, people who drink a lot of coffee, it seems to be fine. And it's like, well, what's a lot? And they're like, 3 or 25 cups a day. And you're like, wait a minute. You're not going to distinguish between 4 and 24 in any way whatsoever? Because like, seems kind of like a difference, But yeah, it's the same kind of deal.
So that's another thing that just absolutely drives me crazy. I had a couple more written down, but they're more like slight annoyances than like things that really grind my gears. And I feel like we've been talking about this long enough. Let's move onward. Yeah,
let's do it. Actually, this question is about moving onward.
It is.
Theoretically. The question was, what other careers we have considered, what we might do in the future, or what we would do differently if we had the opportunity to go back in time and try it all again. So I'll probably go first. You've been talking for a while.
Yeah, go for it. One thing I will note, this was actually our most asked question.
People just want us to stop.
Yeah, you could interpret that as people care about us and they want to know our dreams, goals, and aspirations, or they're like, dude, just just look at your career options. There's got to be something better for you out there.
Can you do anything else?
Yeah.
Yeah. I really think I'll probably try to get an academic job like way in the future, not anytime soon, but like realistically, if I'm being honest about who I am, I cannot retire. I'll die. I mean, I have a very restless mind, and I love working, and I work all the time. And the rare times when I really stop working for like a few days, I go crazy. So that's just completely off the table. And honestly, I think working in an academic job, like as a professor somewhere, is a really, really nice situation as you get older. Even just like practically speaking, like good benefits. As you get older, you're likely to encounter more health problems. But even just like being in a college town around art and culture and young people, like I think that's a really healthy way to grow old, like in terms of like what kind of environment you wish to put yourself in, socially and intellectually. So I have like really thought about this. Like I really like what I do now and don't plan to change anytime soon, but I have thought like when I'm 60, what am I doing? I really do wonder if I'll end up eventually getting a position like that, just because it would be a lot of fun and like I said, a good way to grow old, I think.
So how do you see that working logistically? Because I mean, the route into academia is usually, be hyper productive in grad school, maybe get a postdoc position, be hyper productive there, then become junior faculty and publish like a madman to work your way up the ladder. Do you think that they would that they'd spring for someone who was 60 and had never had any sort of academic job before and probably wasn't motivated to churn out 15 pubs a year?
I mean, well, they're also looking for professional athletes, and I've got that twice over. And no, I mean, well, there's different academic environments. You know what I mean? Like it would be almost certainly at a school that prioritizes teaching more than research.
Gotcha.
Because I mean, teaching's fun too, and like you could still do a little bit of research output. But no, I mean, I'm not gonna like turn 60 and be like, I really need a change of pace, and then be like, you know what I'm gonna do? Start a research lab at a highly funded institution. And like,
No, I mean, that makes sense. Like we met and spent most of our time together at UNC. So like when I picture Eric Trexler in academia, I picture Eric Trexler at an R1. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it'd be very different. What about you?
Yeah, so I actually briefly flirted with a couple other careers. So if my wife wasn't as competent and successful, I would probably be coaching people in person. So after graduation, I had a job lined up to coach people at a gym in North Carolina. She got a very, very prestigious journalism internship that placed her in California. We were already married at that point. And we were like in the second year of our marriage. So that doesn't seem like an opportune time to kind of try out a distance relationship again. And so, I mean, her opportunity was awesome and super exciting. And so we went to California. If she wouldn't have gotten that internship, probably would have coached at that gym. Talking to the owner, he kind of had like a vision for me to like coach for a couple years and then kind of become like maybe general manager of the gym. And I mean, that's probably the track that I would have gotten on. And it was basically pure chance that I wound up on the road I am now. Another thing that I briefly flirted with was being a history professor. So I've mentioned this on the podcast a few times. I originally went to college as a history major. I got to like the senior seminar, like capstone class. We were talking about career options. That's what made me realize like I had done no long-term planning. I didn't actually want any of the jobs that I could get with that degree. Yeah, I was just a history major because I liked learning about history. But there for about 2 weeks, I was like, history grad school sounds very grueling, but I do think it would be kind of fun to be a history professor, like once I got to the other side of that process. So I was like briefly flirting with that idea until, I don't know. I'm like vaguely misanthropic, and especially so for people under maybe like 23, 24. And so I don't know. I just didn't want to work with college kids all the time. Like the most of like the actual job description other than teaching college kids sounded fun, but most of the job is teaching college kids. And so I decided against that, but I did briefly flirt with it. In terms of what we'd like to do in the future, I have a few ideas. One is just buy a tract of land in the country and do like subsistence farming, but do it with like a nest egg, so that when I like get old and have health problems, it wouldn't be like, well, can't work the farm, guess I'll starve. Where, basically I would be able to have an exit strategy, but like I grew up in the country, grew up helping out on farms when I was young. I like that sort of lifestyle agrees with me. So that is an idea kind of rolling around in my mind. Another one, very, very different, is, when I decide I'm done with this whole fitness thing, and again, like many years in the future, maybe again when I'm like in my 60s or something, like open a food truck, because I love cooking.
I've told you to do that.
Yeah, like I'm not going to do that anytime soon, because that would be a lot of work and be very time consuming. But yeah, like opening up a food truck might be fun. I pronounce that weird. Food truck might be fun. Or just like getting a bed and breakfast and, like doing a little housework through the day, cooking stuff in the morning. Like if they also want me to cook them dinner, like that would be super fun. But like something related to food. And then last thing, people are always surprised when I say this, but I say this without a shred of irony. When I was in high school, I wasn't sold on the idea of going to college in the first place. I worked lawn care and construction over the summers, and I like legitimately enjoyed it. You're outside, like you're in the sun. Like the more I'm in the sun, the better vibes I have. I like lawn care is fun because you get insane instant gratification, because most things you do, like you're working along and you don't really get the feeling of like having accomplished something until it's done, or until you've gotten like a lot of it done. I love mowing grass because you mow the grass, you look behind you, there's no grass anymore, or like it is shorter than it once was. And I just find mowing grass like very zen. I enjoy it a lot. And then construction, like it's not something I would want to do when I was old. Like I very much think that would be a problem. But like as a job for a young man, like doing that in high school, dude, it was fucking great. Like I was working with some people in my family who also work construction. I liked the other guys on the crew. Like it's a very, it was like it's basically doing like group-based activities outside and working with power tools, and I like that. So yeah, there was a while when I was like convincing, like my parents were trying to convince me, and like people around me were trying to convince me to go to college. I was just like, I don't know if I want to go to college. Like I really like doing lawn care and construction, and if I would have gone that route, I don't know that I would have regretted it. Like, I think I like what I do now more, but I don't think I would have been upset with myself if I went either of those directions.
I never like thought about doing it long term, but when I was in high school, I worked at a gym, but I was like a kid, and it was like a big like Lifetime Fitness kind of branch gym. And so I was like a janitor basically, but dude, I would go to work and like, if something needed to be cleaned up, I clean it up. But I pretty much leaned on the mop and just talked fitness to people during the time of the day when they were like super enthusiastic about fitness. everyone's coming in for their hour of the day where they get to just, do their fitness thing. So it was like my life was like living out an online bodybuilding forum, but without any negativity trolling. It was just like really good times and talking fitness and like, hey, how's that bench coming along? Elbow feeling better? It was awesome. Like I genuinely had a really good time doing that. And like I never thought of it as like a long-term deal, but like if I was still leaning on that broom just talking fitness all day, I'm sure I'd be all right.
Yeah.
It was pretty cool.
Hell yeah. All right. So I think that does it for my answer as well. Let's move on.
All right.
All right. So next question we were asked is, are we mindful about what we share on social media, and what is our thought process behind what we post?
Yeah, I'll go first. I'm definitely mindful, but probably not in the way they're thinking. Like I think when people think of like mindfully curating your social media, it's like I've got a strategy and I'm trying to work towards some kind of image or output or something.
Trying to mold your personal brand.
Yeah. And that is not what I'm doing. So I was just on a different podcast talking about this, but like this is just me from the heart. I really don't think that many people need my opinion on the topics that I see discussed most frequently on social media. So like,
which for anyone keeping score at home, like you will notice we have not touched many, if any, hot button issues in Fireside Chats. Like,
yeah,
like we'll talk about random shit, but we're not gonna be like, okay, for the next segment, Eric, do you believe Tara Reid's allegations? You know what I mean? Like that's just not. I have opinions. I'm very much like you. I have opinions. I don't know why anyone would give a single shit what my opinions are.
That's the thing. Like, if I come across a conversation on social media where I think I have a perspective that is important or valuable, I will chime in, and I do. But what I found is that almost never happens, because like the stuff that's getting talked about most frequently is just not in my area where I'm like, ooh, they need to hear what I'm thinking. And by the way, I don't begrudge anyone who does like to interact a lot on social media and talk about various topics. It's just not what I like to do. You know what I mean? So I'll also see like the inverse of that, where people are on social media just to tell everyone to shut up.
Yeah.
I'm like, dude, chill. Like, if people want to chat, let them chat. But like, it's just not for me. Like, I don't really have this burning desire to make people address or acknowledge or agree with my perspective. Like, I have thoughts about a lot of this stuff, but I just rarely get to a point where I'm like, you know who needs to know my thoughts on this? Everybody. Everybody should know.
Yeah.
So like, yeah. And every now and then I will come across something where I'm like, I really have stuff to say about this that I think people ought to know. Like, I want to share this.
Yeah.
But it's almost never, using social media is almost never the right platform for it.
Yeah.
You know, because if I have an idea that I think is important or valuable, it's probably related to fitness or research.
Yeah.
And the avenues for really clearly conveying a good, well-articulated point, typically I would lean more toward writing an article, writing a peer-reviewed paper, or even recording something for the podcast.
Yeah.
You know, but I'm almost never like, the best medium for this is for me to write a 7-paragraph Facebook status that is like not searchable and I'll never find it again.
Yeah.
You know?
No, I agree with that wholeheartedly. I used to post on social media way more. Like when when my what is it even called? Memories. Like when Facebook notifies me of my memories on a daily basis. I have a lot of Facebook memories from between 3 and 7 years ago, and then very few in like the last 3 years. Part of that was I just got too busy to really spend time on social media, and part of that was like when I was young and somehow even stupider than I am now, I thought that people would care about my opinions about things, and I thought that my opinions were valuable and useful. And as I've gotten older, I realized like you know what? I value my own opinions less. I certainly value. So part of it was like self-reflection. Like I'll be scrolling down Facebook and I'll be like, every single one of you is an idiot. Like,
Yeah.
like I don't care about any of your opinions about anything. And I have no reason to believe that if I posted, it would be any less stupid.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I don't know. I am less confident in my own opinions. I value them less, and I recognize that either other people don't value them, or if they do value them, they fucking shouldn't. You know. And so yeah, I've shared less of them over time. And yeah, when I post, it's generally, when I post on Facebook, generally it's either just like random shit. Most of the stuff I post is like fitness related, like, hey, we have a new article out, check it out. Or occasionally when I wade into waters that are about something that's kind of like a hot topic going on in the world today, it's usually just to clarify like random technical points that like people may not be aware of. So 2 examples of that. It seems like a lot of people, like their entire content strategy in these trying times are, I'm going to post about COVID-19 6 times a day. I'm a personal trainer. I am well positioned to share my thoughts about this. I don't do that. I've posted about it exactly twice, and both times it was like clarifying math things. The first was like way back in like early or like mid-February, when people were like, oh, only like, you know, a couple hundred or like couple thousand people in the US have it now. Like, why are people freaking out? Like, so many people get the flu every year. It was just like, I don't know if you guys understand how exponential growth works. Like hundreds can become thousands, can become millions, like pretty fucking quickly. You know, I wasn't saying like that is what's going to happen. It's just like, this is why people are concerned. Like,
Yeah.
try to wrap your head around the concept of exponential growth, and like maybe that will help you understand why people are concerned about it. And then the other one was just talking about how like linearly scaled graphs aren't great for looking at exponential growth. So I was like, hey, if you're looking at a site that has data about this and there's a log scaling button, click the log scaling button, and then this is how you interpret a log scaled graph. So yeah, just like random technical stuff. The other one, so like I rarely post about politics anymore. Something that I always share like every election season when when people are like, this is finally going to be the election where a third party breaks through. The thing is, like, it kind of may, but at least in the context of US politics and like a first past the post voting system, there's something called Duverger's law. And it's not a law like gravity is a law, but it's something that's been observed in basically every political system that has a first past the post voting system, where due to people voting strategically, it always collapses to two dominant parties over time. And so, you know, it's not like that is an ironclad law of nature and can never change, but it's like, you know, this is something to keep in mind. And there are like certain very like niche contexts where like a third party can come through. So like if a main party is like completely collapsing, like back when the Whigs collapsed in US history, like a third party can rise up and take its place. Or there can be like maybe like regional parties. That's something that happens in some contexts. But yeah, so it's less like telling people don't vote third party, and more like, hey, if you're giving people this advice, like, here's something you should be aware of about how first past the post voting systems tend to function. So yeah, like I'll occasionally just post stuff to clarify technical points. But yeah, that's about it. Because when I understand a technical subject well, I feel like my input is valuable, because I think a lot of other people may not understand those technical subjects. Otherwise, when it's just like how I feel about certain shit, I don't care, and neither should you. So that's mostly like Facebook, because that's like the only social medium I think about. As far as like what I post on Instagram goes, I don't know. I forget Instagram exists for weeks or months at a time. And when I post something, it's just to let people who care about me know that I'm still alive. Like that is what's going through my mind when I post something on Instagram. Like, hey, still here. So yeah, don't plan my funeral yet.
Post a good picture of Oswald.
Yeah,
that's always good.
Yeah, that is providing clear value to people.
Yeah. There is one point I'd like to clarify. This came up, like I mentioned, I was talking about this the other day on a podcast, and inadvertently, I think the way I was putting it, they're like, why do you think you're above interacting on social media? And I quickly was like, no, I'm below it.
Yeah.
Like, I really don't believe anyone should care about me at all. Mm-hmm. It's certainly not my opinions.
Yeah.
So, like, that's the thing is I'm not like, oh, look at you losers talking on social media. I'm like, they're doing fine without me, and I don't think they need me for this.
Yeah. It's one of those things that can come across pretty poorly.
Yeah.
When I say I'm scrolling down my timeline and I don't value any of your opinions, I don't mean that as a slight against you or to say that, like, I think my opinions are better. It's like, I think my opinions are just as bad. Like,
right, yeah.
I don't think any of us have worthwhile opinions.
I think,
I don't know.
The more I started learning about, like, one thing that I felt really knowledgeable about, the more I realized I shouldn't be talking about anything.
Yeah,
except for that.
That's precisely what happened to me as well.
Yeah, you're just like, dude, wow, I've never heard someone talk, explain what I'm learning now effectively. Mm-hmm. I'm probably so bad at talking about everything other than this, that I just shouldn't do it anymore.
Yeah, no, and I don't. I agree wholeheartedly.
All right, should we move on?
Dude, fucking Zuckerberg is going to listen to this episode and just, like, not show our stuff on Facebook anymore because we're discouraging the posting life.
That might be true.
The death of our podcast.
That's a bummer.
All right, let's move on to a more optimistic topic where we're going to be rays of sunshine. So someone asked, how do you develop self-love, a positive outlook on life, and self-confidence? So let's give us the self-love talk, Trex.
Well, so I kind of have to answer them all at the same time because, like, this question really got me thinking. Because it was like, how do you develop self-love? And I was like, I don't know, because I hate myself. and then I was like, well, okay, but how do you develop a positive outlook on life? I'm like, dude, whoever asked this has never met me, because, like, I comfortably skew negative for sure. Like, if you're in a group of people and you're like, we need someone to spot all the problems, like, I'm your guy, or all the potential problems that will never happen.
Yeah.
But then the self-confidence one got me, because I was like, you know what? Like, I definitely hate myself and I'm definitely pretty negative, but I actually feel pretty confident most of the time. And that really got in my head. I was like, how does that work? And I think the thing is that, like, I personally, like, intrinsically, the narrative that I live by, whether or not it makes any sense, like, the narrative that guides me is very purpose-driven. And in the things I'm currently pursuing, I have a pretty high level of self-efficacy. So, like, I feel like I'm on a trajectory that's important to me and valuable to me. Like, I think I'm on a trajectory that involves doing some cool things. Mm-hmm. And I have a decent amount of confidence in my ability to continue growing and getting better at it and moving forward effectively. Mm-hmm. And so, like, for me, I just kind of, even though I'm really negative in the immediate term, my general outlook toward the future is quite positive, because I really do believe, like, just focus on building, learning, growing, moving forward, stay busy, keep getting better. And, like, I do genuinely have an optimistic view about the future, even though I'm very negative in the immediate term. So self-love and positive outlook are really not my area of expertise by any stretch, But maybe that's a helpful revelation for someone out there who feels similar. And by someone, I mean you, Greg, because you said that this was pretty much how you felt.
Yeah, I didn't write anything in the outline because I was like, yeah, that pretty much covers it. If I were to make a soundbite about this, like, I think I'm kind of a piece of shit, but I'm generally good at what I do. Like, I also have a relatively low self-assessment in terms of like who I am as a person. And you could, well, don't, because she'd get annoyed, but you could theoretically ask Lindsay about this. Like, I get like super depressed and existential around my birthday every year because it causes me to like reflect upon who I am and what I've done in the past year. And I just like never like that, you know? I am somewhat terrified of being alone with my own thoughts because I really don't like myself at all. But at the same time, in the thing, like very much exactly what you said, in the stuff that I focus on and try to do good at, I think I'm pretty good at it. And so I'm I'm pretty confident that things that I do, I can be good at them, but that I'm just like kind of a piece of shit.
Like I've said on the show before, like if I could find a way to spend less time with myself,
Yeah.
I would.
Yeah.
I would take that bet. I mean, I would take that trade-off any day. Like,
Yeah.
You know, the ability to just kind of not hang out with me for a while would be great.
Mm-hmm.
So like I'm with you, but like I think the fact that I'm pretty like purpose driven and like I feel like I'm working and getting better every day. It's the same way. I like look back at the past year or two and be like, dude, you could have been way cooler and, you know, had a way more positive impact on the people around you, and you could have been way more productive and successful.
Yeah.
So like looking in the rear view mirror, I'm always like, I suck. But looking into the future, I'm like, okay, but you know, we've got enough to work with here.
Yeah, like that's pretty much where I'm at too. Like I do have like a growth mindset, so I believe I have the capacity to improve. And when I look back on my life, I think that I was like a less shitty person in this past year than I was 2 years ago or 3 years ago. So, you know, it's not like I view that as an immutable characteristic about myself. Like, I just think I suck, but I used to suck a lot more. And moving into the future, I'll probably still be an utter piece of shit, but like hopefully less and less so over time. So I guess that's kind of like a positive outlook on the future.
Yeah. And by the way, we keep talking about ourselves, you know, as being just like awful people. It probably sounds like we're both like serial killers or something. What, just to put like a more specific like frame on it, one of the things that really bothers me about myself is I wish that I was just better with social interactions. Like I wish like I said, like I'm pretty negative. I wish that when people interacted with me, they walked away thinking like, wow, Eric really brightened my day. And I don't think I bring that to people at all.
See, so I think this is why we're friends, because I am also, I'm like, so, okay, if people who know me are listening to this, they're like, Greg's full of shit right now. Like, he does not hate himself as much as it sounds like. And the thing is, like, I have an unrealistically cheery disposition. And that doesn't necessarily mean I'm happy all the time. That just means that I always look really happy. But I do think, like, I just have, like, good vibes through the day in general. And like I said, I don't want to be left with my own thoughts, but if I'm around other people and I'm not just like locked in my head, like I generally do feel pretty good most of the time. And so I think like there's something about your demeanor that I just find very funny. And so you are generally like, and I mean like Lindsay's the same way. Like you and Lindsay are both kind of like pessimistic and like downers, but for whatever reason, I don't get bad vibes from that. Like I think the way that you present negative possibilities is amusing for some reason. And it's not that I don't take it seriously. Like I just find your demeanor amusing.
Well, I mean, I'm glad, but see, I'm the opposite. Like you mentioned, like if you're, as long as there's like that interaction going, you're around people, you're like, okay, I can keep the good vibes going. The thing that frustrates me the most about myself that is like, I wish I was just like better, is I'm the opposite. If I'm around people for a while, I'm like, come on, Eric, bring the good vibes. But like, I'm such an introvert that I get fatigued, and I'm like telling myself, Eric, stop being grumpy and negative. You're in public. But I just can't. I can't stop. It's like once I saturate my interaction levels, I can't.
Okay, so here's what I'll say. Here's like a little bit of therapy for you. This is going to go horrendously badly. So I don't remember what it was like to not know you. Like I remember the first time we hung out and went to Beer Garden and got some beers, but like I don't remember like the details of that interaction super well. Like most of the time we've known each other fairly well. Like we went through a trial by fire very early on in our friendship. And so, yeah, I don't know how you come across to people who don't know you that well, but exactly what you were describing to like basically everyone who knows you, it's less like, God, Eric's such a downer, and more just like kind of an endearing thing where it's just like, there he goes again.
Yeah, that's true.
And I mean, like, people know we're friends, and I've literally never heard anyone say like Eric's a downer to be around. I think you're almost so negative that people think it's a bit, and it's a pretty good bit.
Well, maybe yeah, that's I'm gonna reemerge in like 20 years and just tell everyone it was like just a complete Andy Kaufman, 3-decade-long personality bit.
Yeah.
But no, I wish I'm still trying to get better at that, and I think I am getting better intermittently. You know what I mean? I don't think it's a linear trend, but intermittently I'm getting better at it. And another thing that when I say like, God, I suck and I don't have a positive self-image, it's I wish I was more present at the moment during social interactions. I really suck at that. I get so in my own head about whatever the hell I'm thinking about that I honestly think it's why I have a bad long-term memory. I think I never processed most of the stuff that was happening around me because like I spent my whole life literally in my own head, barely taking in the things around me. And it's just something I continue to work on, and I have to accept.
Can I give you a tip for that?
Yeah.
Turn your phone off, put it in another room, and have like 2 beers.
Yeah, but dude, like, you know how people have like a bedtime routine and they're like, oh, I'll like read and it'll help me relax. And like, dude, my bedtime routine for the last 15 years has been I lay down in silence and stare at the ceiling and think hard. And it's almost like I need it. Like I need to just like, I don't know. I can't explain it. But yeah, I spend a lot of time in my own brain thinking about anything in particular.
Fair enough.
But I'm working on it.
Okay, so here is an actual tip. Not for developing self-love. That's overrated hippie garbage. But for like positive outlook on life, or at least like your own life, and developing self-confidence, I think that there's a lot of... And I mean, like, there's probably people who are like psychologists listening to this, and they're going to tear this advice apart. Like, going back to what we were saying about social media, my opinions are all terrible. This is probably bad advice, but whatever. It's a fireside chat. That's the whole point of these. So something that I think helps me, at least, is like being really purposeful about trying to get better at things, and also being purposeful about either like journaling, so like actually writing it down, or just like making a point of like intensely mentally cataloging your process and stuff. So like as you develop new skills or you improve the skills you have, it's less like, you're getting better, but you don't feel great about it because like you're still not as good as you could be. And and you haven't put enough time between like when you started trying to improve and where you are now, that you can really look back and notice like, oh, night and day difference. So I think that if you're very intentional about trying to improve at stuff and making notes along the way about like concrete things that you are improving at and are getting better at, then you can kind of like build up a file of that, of, you know, essentially, here's all the shit I've tried, and here are all of the concrete ways that I've improved and gotten better, and hey, there's beginning to be a lot of them. I can feel pretty good about, you know, my ability to learn and master new skills, and then I think that that's kind of like the key for self-confidence. Like there's a difference between knowing you're good at something and knowing that you are good at getting good at things, if that makes sense. And so I think that's one of the reasons I like cooking so much, because there's so many different cooking skills. And like, as you know, as you practice them, you just get better over time. And so I've learned and gotten so much better at so many different things in the kitchen that helps me kind of like generalize it and be like, dude, I've like learned and gotten better at like so much shit. Like, I'm pretty good at getting good at stuff. And that doesn't mean that I think that I'm good at everything, but it's like, I think that I could get pretty good at most things if I tried. Yeah. And I think that's true of most people. You know, like there are innate differences in aptitude and like different realms. And like, there are things that I'm good at and things that I'm like naturally bad at. But even the stuff I'm naturally bad at, I've made note of myself improving in enough different domains that, you know, I don't think I could be like world-class good at everything, but I think I could get to the point that I was like adequately good at most things that I wanted to get good at. And like, that's kind of like the point that I've gotten to with like my general self-confidence. So it's not like self-confidence that I could go out and do anything right now and be great. Like, I think I'd suck absolute shit at most things, but, you know, given enough time, I think I could be pretty decent. And so I personally derive a lot of self-confidence from that. And dear listener, maybe you could too.
Yeah. Now, we've talked about a lot of stats this episode, and some, we really cracked our brains open and did some introspective thinking out loud about who we are. To wrap it up, can we do some lighthearted? Somebody asked for some outlier things we've seen in the gym.
Our boy, Patrick Humphrey.
Yeah. Excellent. Speaking of skills, excellent magician.
And just a great dude. Speaking of someone who is just like 24/7 good vibes.
Oh, yeah.
Dude, Patrick is one of the most fun people to be around.
Yeah.
And he has one of the most fun and just unrelentingly positive presences on social media. He runs a group called Eat, Train, Progress.
Correct. Yeah.
And
correct.
if you're on Facebook, you should join that Facebook group. It's great. It's like, it's one of the few places you can go on Facebook where interacting with people feels like a warm hug.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. But yeah, he was like, hey, so what are some like just outlier things you've seen in the gym that are just crazy? And I think I might have told this story before. I'll keep it really brief just in case. But I was I was like kind of volunteering at a gym with some like nutrition stuff, and it was a bunch of players getting ready for the NFL Combine. This dude comes walking out of the gym, finished his workout. He's a running back. Looks like, I mean, you name the federation. If he steps on stage, he wins. Just cut out of stone.
Yeah.
Insane physique. He's been there training from like 7 to 3 in the afternoon, just getting after it. And we're talking to him. We're like, all right, so what'd you have for breakfast? He looks at us like it's the most irrelevant question you could ask him. Like, that's weird. Like, it'd be like, hey, what's your girlfriend's name? You know, he's like, nothing. And just like totally irrelevant. Why are you asking? You know, we go, okay, well, what'd you have during your session? Water. Yeah. Like, do you take a break and get a snack in between? No. 7 to 3, like all day training. Mm-hmm. What do you plan to have when you get home? I don't know. I'll find something. This dude had that physique and literally has never even considered like I wonder what I should eat sometimes.
Yeah.
It was the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. And I guarantee if you looked at him, you would look at him and immediately say, that dude's on gear. Test him now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, he's like the guy I always think of when I see people making claims on the internet, like, oh, so-and-so's like, he's, totally juiced, on gear. And I'm like, dude, I've never been more sure of anything in my life that guy's natural, because you can't even get him to eat breakfast.
Well, I mean, no. Here's what you need to understand. He's investing all of his time and mental effort into running the exact right compounds and timing everything perfectly to beat all of his drug tests.
Post-cycle therapy, on and off.
Yeah, and he just doesn't have the mental space and energy to think about food after that.
Exactly. Yeah, but I'm just like, dude, there's no way. There's no way.
Yeah.
But yeah, that to me, I was just like, okay, I'm never going to accuse anyone of anything again. That's it for me. There are just genetic gods among us, and you just have to accept it. But what about you? What are some cool outliers?
So one is probably the craziest, like, short-term client, like, before and after strength thing that I've had, and one of the craziest that I've seen. So, not going to name any names because potentially personal information, but I had a female client one time who I had previously known and had previously trained with some, and she was already like pretty strong. I think her best deadlift at the time, like to that moment, had been either like 380 or 385, which this was several years back. Like, people may be listening to this now and being like, there's so many female powerlifters who do that. But like, this was a while ago. Like that was like a pretty crazy number for a female lifter at the time. And so she came to me and she was like, hey, I'm trying to get back into lifting. I've had to take some time off for various reasons. Can you help me with that? And so I was like, sure, like, I'll write a program for you. Her starting deadlift number was like 280. So, she was clearly detrained. And I was thinking, like, okay, over the next 3 or 4 months, if we can get you back to somewhere in the neighborhood of like 380 on the deadlift, which is where you'd been prior, I'll be pretty happy with that. Cause she'd been out of the gym for like over a year at this point. So I was concerned early on that it just wasn't going well, because she was very busy and didn't check in very often. And when she did check in, it would just be like, oh yeah, doing the workout, things are going pretty well. I think the only thing we tweaked the whole time, she was just like, hey, the close grip bench is like kind of bugging my elbow a little bit. Can we sub something else in? So we subbed something else in. That was like the only program tweak. We maybe communicated like 3 times. And I was like, well, I hope it's going well. And then she finished up 4 months of training, checked back in, and she was like, oh, I'm so happy. Like, I hit some numbers. And I was like, what did you do? And she had taken her deadlift from 280 to 425 in 4 months. And that's not all. It gets crazier. The reason that she had taken time off of lifting, like, we didn't talk about this beforehand. And I mean, I guess she just didn't want to volunteer the information. She had bone cancer in her femurs.
Wow.
And like, I'm not an oncologist. I don't know what.
Hey, don't put yourself down like that.
I don't know if one should expect to gain all of one's strength back and get even stronger. But my gut reaction is that like femurs are kind of important for deadlifting. And so, maybe there would be some sort of like long-term, at least like slight weakness from that. I don't know. But yeah, she put like 145 pounds on her deadlift in 4 months. And again, a lot of that was like recouping strength that she had lost. But that was still like a 45 pound PR over her prior best.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that was wild. And probably the wildest thing I ever heard. So this is a secondhand story. I've told it before with the names included. I don't think on the podcast, but I don't know how much of this I'm like supposed to share and
Yeah, I
put
would
names
just
on.
anonymize it.
Yeah, so I'll anonymize it, but Trex can back me up. He knows who these people
Correct,
are.
yeah.
So someone I know was coaching for someone who's like really big in like the off-season football training and like combine prep world. And one of the athletes that he was assigned to do their off-season training for was a like rather diminutive, very, very good running back in the NFL. And so they were doing 4 workouts a week, so it was like 4 days of conditioning, and as far as lifting goes, it was 2 upper body days and 2 lower body days. And this athlete said like, hey, like he only signed up for the conditioning work and the lower body training, didn't sign up for the upper body training. And so my buddy was like, hey man, like, you know, I get it, you're a running back, like lower body strength is more important for what you do, but like it's not going to hurt to get your upper body stronger as well, just so you know you can deal with the topsy-turvy world of getting tackled by 300-pound men in the NFL. And this individual was like, nah man, I can't do it. And my friend is like, no, like why not? Why can't you train upper body? He's like, my arms get too big and then I get a fumbling problem. And
so arm is so big he cannot comfortably cradle a football.
Right,
yeah.
Which makes, that's why I mentioned that this was like a fairly diminutive fellow.
Yeah.
So, you know, not super long arms, and an NFL size football is pretty big, but you know, that on its face seems ridiculous. Like I can't do 3 months of upper body training in the off season because then my arms will just explode and I can't carry a football anymore. And so my friend was like, no, like there's no way that's true. And so I forget the detail. He either got him to agree to 4 weeks or 6 weeks of upper body training. It was one of the two. And he'd previously done some. So again, these aren't like completely new gains. Some of it is kind of like muscle memory. But I believe it was 4 weeks. So tested him on close grip bench, 5 rep max, just to kind of get a feel for where he was at and what loads he should be training with. And his starting 5 rep max bench press was like 275, which, you know, that's a good number for someone who doesn't bench press, but it's not out of this world for an NFL running back by any means. So he trained him for, like I said, I believe 4 weeks. It may have been 6. Retested his bench number at the end. That was like the end of their agreed upon time that he was going to subject himself to upper body training. Retested his bench number, and if memory serves, his 5 rep max close grip bench was either 425 or 455. He'd put a solid 1.5 inches on his arms, and as soon as he finished the last rep of close grip, he racked it. He like found a football and like made a show of like it not being able to fit in his arms anymore. He's like, see, I told you, my arms get too big. And yeah, then he didn't do any upper body work the rest of the summer in an attempt to trim his arms down enough to carry a football. And to the best of my knowledge, never did any upper body work again. And so my buddy told me this story. And I wanted to get a feel for like how feasible it was. Like you were saying, like, how could it be that someone's arms are so big that they can't hold a football? And so, like, I Google image searched the guy because I remembered him being, like, a pretty brawny dude, like, just a little bowling ball, like, busting through the line.
Yeah.
I never, like, noticed how big his arms were. Dude, I fucking Google image searched the guy. His arms were fucking enormous.
Yeah, he looks like Lee Priest.
Yeah, like,
as a running back.
Like, unbelievable. And so, his arms were huge even if he was training arms all the time. But, like... Yeah, so that
you know any picture you've seen of him, he probably hasn't trained arms in at least 12 weeks.
Yeah.
And almost certainly longer than that.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, that's a secondhand story, but I know the individual who told it to me well. I have no reason to doubt it.
Yeah. I mean, I was telling you, I used to do some testing on some retired NFL athletes, body composition stuff, and I just vividly remember this one time a dude comes in and the sleeves on his shirt are just screaming, like they're just stretched to the last thread. Like his arms are bursting out of his shirt. And I'm like, dude, how often you lifting these days? And he's like, retired. Like it was years. I mean, like retired X number of years ago. Haven't touched a weight since. Whenever I do, I have to buy new clothes. Until hearing his story, or until going through that, I would not have believed the story you told, but I believe it very much.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Again, like, so I don't want to like name names and sound like I'm flexing or anything like that, but a gym I used to coach at did have a few like NFL athletes who would train there in the off season, and dude, it's almost like they're an entirely different species.
Yeah.
Like I am not someone who has bad genes for building muscle and getting strong, but every single one of them, if they like thought about powerlifting too hard, they would break every world record. Like it's outrageous. And that's one of the reasons why in the whole like natty or not type thing, I kind of feel like I don't care about your opinion unless you have worked with like extreme outlier athletes. Just because like when your consideration is what can the freakiest of the freaks do, but the freakiest of the freaks you've ever met is like the biggest guy who goes to your gym, you fundamentally have not experienced how extreme physiological outliers can be.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, I feel like powerlifting is getting to the point where some of the top guys in the sport are like extreme outliers. I didn't think that was the case so much several years back.
Right.
And when I told people like, oh, like all of the records are going to be like 200-300 pounds above where they are now, people were like, you're crazy. And time has proven me right. So I do think that some of like the upper crust in the sport now is getting to that like extreme outlier range. But yeah, like NFL or even like D1 college athletes, they are physiological outliers to a degree that you can hardly conceive of unless you've worked with that population.
I totally agree. All right. Well, I think that probably does it for today's episode, right?
I think it does.
All right.
So hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for sticking around after our statistical complaining early in the episode. If you want to submit a question either to our normal Q&A podcasts, which we will do another one of at some point if Eric has me back, you can submit that or questions for Fireside Chat, just completely off-topic stuff, at tiny.cc/sbsqa. If you're listening to this on some podcast platform, give us a 5-star rating if you like it. If you don't like it, please be kind. Don't rate us. Or do. Actually, honestly, like the negative reviews are some of my favorite.
But don't just leave a low star review and no comment. Yeah. Like it's got to be a funny review.
Yeah, so here's the gambit, right? If you love the show, leave us a 5-star review. If you hate the show, do also leave a review, but don't be a pansy about it. Like, tell us why. Lay into us.
Yeah.
Like our 1-star reviews are some of like the highlights of my week. And we haven't gotten any good ones in a while. So don't leave like a joke 1-star review. Like if you actually like the show, because like if we get too many bad reviews, that does actually hurt us.
Yeah.
But yeah. If you've been wanting to leave a negative review, attach some text with it. We would greatly appreciate it.
If you're gonna be negative, at least be funny about it and very, very specific.
Right. And if you're listening on YouTube, like, comment, subscribe.
One thing I did want to bring up, so I run a podcast called the Stronger by Science podcast, not Fireside Chats. That's my show. I'm the host. We are going to be back in 2 weeks. So we have been trying to get something out every single week. We're actually going to be back in 2 weeks. We're getting back on our typical schedule of every other week. And it's going to be, we're going to be putting in some more hard-hitting, scientifically rigorous content. So it takes a little bit of prep time to get those ready. It's not just us talking about freaky athletes we've met.
All right. So I think that does it. Hope everyone is having a good day, having good vibes, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks for listening to the Stronger by Science podcast. Now, Greg and I are not experts in medicine or health or really anything else for that matter. So before you make any changes to your diet and exercise habits, make sure you check with a doctor or another healthcare professional. If you enjoyed this podcast and you'd like to support it, visit strongerbyscience.com to check out the products and services that we offer. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.